Okay, hello guys. And this is our class number 4, International Monetary Policies. And I will try to be concise because I realized that in order to explain better the political models that are in the chapter, I need to explain a little bit some trade economics. So please be patient and let's begin. So recall from class 1, there are 4 categories in IP. In class 2 and class 3, we explained the first category, which was the international trade system. So this week, we have to explain the international monetary system. That is the second category in IP. The international monetary system explains how the economic transactions in the international field are intertwined with politics. So our main question in this class is what determines the specific exchange rate policies that governments adopt. However, as you can see, we have to talk about exchange rate and exchange rate policies. So in order to do that, we need to first understand what is an exchange rate, what is an interest rate, what is economic growth, and so on and so forth. So we have to begin with the aggregate supply and demand. So the aggregate supply and demand is a model that explains the gross domestic production. So the gross domestic production is the demand of the 3 main actors. And these 3 actors are the households, and the households make consumption, which is represented by the letter C. The second main actor is the firms. Firms invest. So, and this is represented by I. And the third main actor is the government. And the government makes the public consumption, which is represented by the letter G. However, as you can see, there are another letter here, which is X. X is not made by one specific actor. It's made by the 3 actors. And X is exports. What is an export? It's a good or service that is produced domestically, but is sold in the international market. Another important thing that you have to see here is that the C, I, and G, these 3 letters have the superscript I, which means that the consumption, the investment, and the public expenditures are both in or produced domestically. However, in an open economy, not all the consumption, the investment, and the government is produced domestically. In fact, households, firms, and governments could buy some of the goods and services from abroad. So, therefore, the consumption, the investment, and the public expenditures, the total consumption, the total investment, and the total government expenditures is the sum of the consumption produced domestically and the consumption of goods produced from abroad, as well as the investment. The total investment is the investment produced domestically plus the investment produced abroad. And the government expenditures are is the sum of the public goods produced domestically and the public goods produced abroad. We replace these 3 equations. In the first equation, we have the following. As you can see, all the green letters have a minus sign before the letter. Why? Well, because if we sum up the consumption, the investment, and the public goods that are produced from abroad, this creates the imports of a country. Imports are introduced in the GDP with a negative sign because imports are not produced domestically. Imports are goods and services that are paid with national currency, but this money is not within the country. This money is not producing unemployment, it's not paying the wages of the citizens of our country, and so on and so forth. So that's why imports are introduced in the GDP with the negative signs. If we subtract the imports from the exports, we get the net exports. So basically, if the net exports are positive, it's because our country is exporting more than what is importing. But if the net exports are negative, it's because our country is importing more than what we are exporting. So here we have our first important term that we need to understand, an exchange rate. This term is the net exports. So the net exports depends on the exchange rate. Why? Because an exchange rate refers to the value of one currency in terms of another currency. In other words, an exchange rate refers how much my currency could buy 1 unit of a foreign currency. It represents the rate at which one currency can be exchanged or converted into another currency. And we need the exchange rate to make foreign transactions. Why? Well, because imagine that you want to sell a good, an American good to Mexico. I don't know, pair of shoes. So the Mexican could buy the pair of shoes with Mexican pesos. But the problem is that for us, Mexican pesos are not useful. Why? Because we cannot use the Mexican pesos to pay the rent, to pay the food, and so on and so forth. So we need dollars. So the Mexicans have to convert their Mexican pesos to dollars. They have to buy first dollars, and then they could buy the pair of shoes. So depending on these prices, which is the exchange rate at the end, exchange rate is a price, how much you have to pay to buy 1 unit of a foreign currency, well, that will impact the levels of exports or the levels of imports of our country. In order to explain this, let's do the following example. Imagine that in our country, we produce computers and we export computers. So, sorry, my window is open. So we export computers, and the price of computers is in dollars. Why? Because we are producing computers here in America. So the price is in dollars, and the price of the computer is $1,000. However, we want to import apples from Europe. So the price of the apples are in euros, and the price of the apples is 10 euros. So let's create a benchmark scenario. This benchmark scenario doesn't say anything. It's only to create a comparison scenario. So in this comparison scenario, in this benchmark, we are going to use an exchange rate that is $1 per 1 euro. So with 1 euro, with $1, I could buy 1 euro. This is our benchmark. So if this is the case, and we are going to export our computers, we have to translate this price, the export price, in euros, because Europeans are our final client. So in this case, the price in euros is 1,000 euros. And it is the same as the imports. If we want to buy imports from Europe and the exchange rate is $1, €1, so the price of the apples is $1. So we need to get first $10 to buy 10 euros and then to buy the apple. However, imagine that the exchange rate is overvalued. What means overvalue? Overvalue is when you have to pay less for getting another currency. So $1 in this moment will buy more euros. Why? Because in this moment, $1 buys 2 euros. Because of that, the prices of the exports and imports changed. So if we want to export our computer, well, an European person has to pay 2,000 euros. So the price of our computer increases suddenly 1,000 euros more. And if we want to buy the apples, well, we don't have to get the $10, but we have to only get $5. Because with $5, we buy 10 euros, and with 10 euros, we buy the apple. So given this new scenario, who win? So win the import competing sectors, win the households. Why? Because in this moment, our currency, or dollars, could buy more euros, and the price of the imports reduces. So we have better prices and we can increase our consumption. However, who lose? Well, the sector that loses is the export-oriented sector. Why? Because they are producing the same computer. And for us, that computer has a price of $1,000. Well, however, for one European person, he has to pay the double. So because of that, the exports decreases and the import increases. But imagine that the scenario changes, and right now we have an undervalued exchange rate. What is an undervalued exchange rate? Well, an undervalued exchange rate is when you have to pay more for getting another currency. It's the opposite. So in this moment, $1 buy only half euro. So we have to pay more if you want to get €1. In fact, we have to pay $2 if you want to get €1 in this scenario. So let's translate the prices of the export and imports. So in this moment, the same computer that for us, the price is the same, $1,000. Well, for one European, it's only 500 euros. And if you want to buy the same apples, well, in this moment, we have to pay double in comparison to the benchmark, and the 4 times in comparison to the overvalued scenario. So we have to pay $20. So if this is the case, who win? So win the export-oriented sector. Why? Because we are producing the same computers with the same cost. However, for an European, is with this exchange rate, the price is cheaper. So we can export more. And who lose? Well, we lose. The household loses. Households lose. Why? Because we have to pay more than double in this moment. So we prefer to buy domestically the apples. Or substitute the apple from another fruit. So who lose? The import competing sectors. And if this is the case, exports will be bigger than imports, and in the overvalue scenario, exports will be lower than imports. So keep in mind this concept. This concept is very important for the class. So the exchange rate will impact the economic sectors and will impact our economy as a whole. So in order to understand a little bit more this, we can see that the net exports, net exports depends negatively on the exchange rate. So if the exchange rate is undervalued, so which means that is reducing the exchange rate, decreases the exchange rate. So remember, you have to pay more for another currency. Exports will be bigger, and imports will be they will reduce. But if the exchange rate increases, which means that the exchange rate is overvalued, well, remember, we have to pay less for getting another currency, so we are incentivizing the imports and disincentivizing the exports. So that's why when we have an undervalued currency, we are enhancing export competitiveness. The price of the goods produces domestically will be relatively cheaper when we express that price in foreign currencies, so exports are more attractive. But when we have an overvalued currency, we are incentivizing imports. Why? Because we are given to the households more economic power to buy and to afford products from abroad. So, but remember, this is only one part of the story. We need the other part of the story. And when do we get the other part of the story? Well, from the same macroeconomic identity. So if we solve net export from this macroeconomic identity, we get that the net export is equal to saving minus investment. What is saving in an economy? Well, saving is defined as the total production, which is Y, the GDP, minus the consumption of the households and the consumption of the government. This is the saving. So, which is, this works as the way that you conceive saving in your private life. So you are, your wage is, I don't know, $100 and your consumption is $50, so your savings are $50. So if your consumption increases from $50 to $80, your savings are only $20. Investment is not part of this equation. Why? Well, because the investment is conceived as a loan. So it depends on the interest rate. So the higher the interest rate, the lower the investment. So if you have to pay more in interest, you prefer not to get more loans. And if the interest rate is lower, you have incentive to get more debt. So, but what is the relationship between savings and investment? And this is very important. Why? Because the relationship between savings and investment will define something that is very crucial in this chapter, which is the autonomy. of the monetary policy. What is an autonomy of monetary policy? Well, the autonomy of monetary policy means that the central bank is able to move the money supply to change the amount of currency in circulation. So if the central bank decides to make an expensive monetary policy, that means that the central bank will inject liquidity in the economy, will increases the currency in circulation. People will get more money in their pockets. Given that people have more money in their pockets, they will consume more and more and more and more. But the money itself, it's less scarce. And the price of the money is the interest rate. So when there are an injection of liquidity, that reduces the interest rate because the price of the money is lower. However, that increases the investment because, remember, lower interest rate, higher levels of investment. Firms have more incentive to get debt. So more investment, more economic growth. However, if people spend more and more and more and more and more, well, that could create something that is called inflation. So in order to control the inflation, the central bank has to make a contractionary monetary policy, which basically is the opposite. Reduces the currency in circulation, reduces the money that is available in the pockets of the people, that increases the interest rate because money in this moment is more scarce, so its price is higher. However, that will decrease the investment because the interest rate is higher. So less investment, less economic growth. If we mix the net exports with the savings minus investment, we will get the exchange rate equilibrium. Why? Because the net exports could represent the demand of national currency. So the net export is the demand for dollars. But that demand for dollars will be covered by the supply of dollars. The supply of dollars that are already covered, the savings and the investment. So it's basically we are saving money and we are lending that money to the firms. So the excellent, the piece of money that is not that is not demanded by the firms, well, we are going to sell that currency to the international market to support the transactions in the international market. So by definition, in that supply and demand movement, we find the exchange rate at equilibrium. And we can have two types of policies of exchange rates, the fixed exchange rate and the floating exchange rate. What is a fixed exchange rate? Well, this is another concept that you need to understand very well in this chapter. Well, under a fixed exchange rate system, the value of a currency is set and maintained by the government or central bank. It's fixed. So the exchange rate has to be constant. And if there is some fluctuations, the government or the central bank have to intervene in the economy to return the price of the currency to this fixed level, which is represented by this flat black line. So in the fixed exchange rate, governments often intervene in the foreign exchange market to ensure the exchange rate, that exchange rate stays in this specific range or in this specific level. But in a floating exchange rate, well, here the equilibrium, the price of the currency is determined by the market forces of supply and demand. So if something is fluctuating based on economic factors such as interest rate, inflation, trade balances, geopolitical events, and so on and so forth, well, the governments and the central banks, they will let the market define by itself the exchange rate, and they are not going to influence or intervene the exchange rate. And this is the basic difference between these two policies. What are the main characteristics and benefits of these two policies? Well, if you are using the fixed exchange rate, well, you have three main features. The first one is that you get stability and certainty. Why? Because business can plan their transactions with confidence because they know what is the exchange rate. So, and they know that there are not going to be any fluctuations. And if there are any, they know for sure that the government or the central bank will intervene to return the price to the fixed level. Based on that, there is a price stability. So with a fixed exchange rate, there are not volatility in imports or export prices. So we don't see these two scenarios that I'm highlighting in this moment. We don't see an overvalue or undervalue scenarios. We don't get changes in the imports consumptions or the export consumptions. So there is a price stability. And the third feature is that we enhance strength. Why? Because we are eliminating uncertainties. And the fixed exchange rate, and therefore, facilitates international trade. Businesses and exporters and importers can engage in long-term contracts because they know that the prices that they are base their contracts today will get the same in the future. The three main benefits of using a floating exchange rate are, first, we have automatic adjustment. We don't need that the government or the central bank monitor the international market. We are letting the market decide what is the optimal price here. We have an independent monetary policy, which is the most important thing. We are giving to the government the autonomy to conduce their monetary policy. So because in the fixed exchange rate, the monetary policy is only used to stabilize the exchange rate. However, in the floating exchange rate, the monetary policy could be used in with different objectives that we are going to cover in a few minutes. And the third part is that we are getting the market efficiency. So here, the price of our currency will show the expectation and information of the market. So which is better than a fixed exchange rate. But what are the consequences of having a fixed exchange rate? The first and the most important one, is because it is covered in this chapter, in all the chapter, is because when you have a fixed exchange rate policy, your government loses autonomy. So every single shock that modifies the exchange rate has to be undone. For instance, if the government wants to expand their economy, so imagine that they want to expand their economy, so they could use more currency within the economy, or they want to expand the economy, creating or more roads or universities, or giving subsidies, subsidize, and so on and so forth. If they do that, they will expand the supply of domestic currency in the market. The problem is that when they do that, they reduce the undervalue the exchange rate. But however, given that we are in a fixed exchange rate, they have to intervene immediately and return the expansionary policy with a contractionary policy. It's the same as if we have a lot of inflation in our economy. Well, we need to make a contractionary policy to control the quantity of currency in our economy. The problem is when we do that, well, we have to raise the interest rate and in parallel, our exchange rate will increases, will be overvalued. However, given that we are in a fixed exchange rate, we have immediately to make an expansionary policy to reduce again the exchange rate. So this is the first and most important consequence of having a fixed exchange rate. Yes, we have these three benefits. However, the cost is that our government loses autonomy. And autonomy is very important, and we are going to cover that in a minute. But remember, an autonomy of the monetary policy is very important because the government uses the monetary policy to change the economy. And if we use the fixed exchange rate, we are preventing to the government to use monetary and fiscal policies to incentive or boost our economy. And this is the base of something that is called the unholy trinity. The unholy trinity is a concept that is covered in the chapter. So let's explain what is the unholy trinity. So basically, governments could have have three policy goals. So they could they want to have fixed exchange rate. Why? Well, because that creates stability and certainty, price stability, and enhanced trade. However, they also want to have autonomous monetary policy. Why? Because they can use the monetary policy to control inflation or to boost the economy, to give money to the people, to mobilize the factor of production and so on and so forth to create growth. And the third goal is capital mobility, allowing financial capital to flow freely into and out of the domestic financial system. We want that the capital moves freely, and if there are if we create better interest rate to attract investment from abroad and so on and so forth. However, the problem with the unholy trinity is that a government can achieve only two of these three goals simultaneously. Why? Well, because look, imagine that we are going to only keep the, sorry, I'm going to make this example here. Imagine that the government wants to get a fixed exchange rate and economic growth, more capital flows. However, the problem is if they want to use monetary policy to boost their economy, well, they are not allowed to do that. Why? Because they are constrained by the fixed exchange rate. So they can open the capital flows, to enter or investment from abroad. However, if one investor from abroad want to invest here in the United States, again, they have to, or he has to translate his money from foreign currency to dollars. And once he does that, that will change the exchange rate. So the government only could use the monetary policy to, again, intervene the economy to return the exchange rate to the fixed level. So the government is losing his autonomy. So let me ask you one important question. Why do countries want to have fixed exchange rate policies if they lose autonomy? What do you think? If you want to, you can stop the video here for a couple of minutes, write down your possible answers, and we'll return in a couple of minutes. Well, the reason is because there was a Keynesian revolution. And the Keynesian revolution is based on the trade-off between domestic autonomy and exchange rate stability. Before World War I and World War II, there was a gold standard system in the international monetary system. Basically, the gold standard is a monetary system in which the value of a country's currency is directly linked to a fixed quantity of gold. So each unit of currency is convertible into a specific amount of gold and a predetermined exchange rate. Why? Well, because if you, in this moment, if you have cash in your wallet and you get $1, this is only a piece of paper. It's no more than a piece of paper. Of course, in your mind and in the collective beliefs, that dollar could buy something, right? $1 could means a part of, could means, I don't know, a can of Coke, right? However, it's only a piece of paper. It's a belief. But before World War I and World War II, that belief was not enough. So people needed to believe, or to have a security that that piece of paper represents something. And the best way to give to that paper security is based on gold. So that's why before World War I and World War II, there was a gold standard. So the gold standard used the same three main features. The first one is convertibility. The currency issued by a country is freely convertible into gold at a fixed exchange rate. So if you don't trust in that piece of paper, you could go to the central bank and to exchange that piece of paper into gold. And you could go, you can get gold in your pocket, and you are more trust, right? That was the main idea behind the gold standard. However, carrying gold on your pockets is so difficult. And imagine that you want to, I don't know, buy something that is less than the gold that you have in your pocket. So that's why economists invented money. So So as a mean of exchange. However, in order to get this convertibility, they needed a fixed exchange rate. An exchange rate between the currency and gold remains constant. Otherwise, the piece of paper was not going to be useful. And the third main feature of the gold standard is the stability and discipline. The gold standard is believed to provide a degree of stability to the monetary system. Why? Because the currency is anchored to a tangible asset, which is the gold. However, that changed after the World War II. Why? Recall the main macroeconomic identity. GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditures plus net exports. However, after wars, the economy was in recession. And in a recession, the problem is that households don't want to consume. They are unemployed. And if they have savings, they are not willing to spend their savings because they are not getting jobs. So they postpone their consumption. And if they postpone their consumption, well, firms don't want to invest because they are not selling goods and services. In fact, they are firing people to try to survive and so on and so forth. So in a recession, households and firms are in the worst part of the economy. Keynes, who was a very important economist, he proposed that the only agent that could spend in a recession is the government. Why? Because it is the only actor that has the autonomy to make expansionary policies, to influence the economy, to intervene in the economy. Even a broken window could create employment. So if the government, if the firms do not want to invest and the households do not want to consume, well, the government could create, I don't know, a street, a highway. And with this project, they could hire people, hire firms. Those firms are going to hire workers. Those workers will receive wages. With the wages, they will buy milk and bread and so on and so forth. Firms that produce milk, they are going to hire again people to extract the milk from the cows and so on and so forth, and the economy will expand. However, there is that will change the basic idea of the gold standard, because in the gold standard, given that there is a fixed exchange rate, the government didn't have autonomy to control the monetary and the fiscal policy. But if they want to create, if they want to give the government the possibility to intervene the economy, to boost the economy, they had to change the gold standard system. So between wars, the global economy faced higher levels of unemployment and economic recession. So after the 1945, countries started to implement Keynesian policies. The Keynesian policies, the main objective was to expand the economy, to create employment, to create growth, to incentivize the economy. The thing is that this idea of expansion was legitimized by votes. Why? Because there was a change in electoral laws. Electoral laws change because they allowed more people to vote. And there was two main effects. The effects number one was that in these electoral changes, working class interests gain a voice in national parliaments. And the working class that could vote, they demanded, more employment. The effect two was to change the gold standard system. Why? Because they vote to require to the government to use monetary policy to manage the domestic economy. But what is the problem with this new international system? The problem is that the monetary and exchange rate politics are driven by competition between groups, pressuring the government to use these policies in ways that advance or defend their economic interests. So the government is not using the monetary and exchange rate policies as a control of the economy, but more as to satisfy the demand. So this is the problem. So based on that, we are going to answer this question: what will government choose? And this is the society-based models of monetary and exchange rate policies. So there are three models in the society-based models of monetary and exchange rate politics. These three models agree that exchange rate policies emerge from political competition. The first model is the electoral model. The second model is the partisan model, and the third model is the sectoral model. The key idea here is to understand how people and other actors influence the government, monetary and exchange rate policies to defend their interests in a scenario where the gold standard system is no longer in use. So these three models are only useful if we are in the Keynesian policies. Why? Because otherwise, in the gold standard, governments were not allowed to use monetary and fiscal policies to boost the economy. So let's begin with the electoral model. The electoral model is a basic model after the World War II. The main idea was that the government cared most about monetary policy autonomy. And they only tried to maintain the fixed exchange rate only in certain cases if the economy needed. Remember, the level of exchange rate depends on the domestic demand. So the prediction of this model is that social demands there were social demands to use monetary policies to expand the economy and to let the exchange rate float. Well, why? Well, because remember, in the between wars, there were high levels of unemployment and economic recession. So people gather around and vote to change that, to request to the government to create employment, to create growth, and to incentivize the economy. So in order to do that, the government has to move from the fixed exchange rate to floating exchange rate. However, what is the problem with that? What is the problem with this electoral model? Well, there is a fact. In a democratic political system, governments must periodically stand for re-election. So politicians have incentives to expand the economy. Why? Because they want to, if they expand the economy, they could create employment and investment. And in that way, they boost their political support. And this is known as the pre-electoral economic booms. This is a very cool concept. So it's very common that politicians may be more likely to adopt expansionary macroeconomic policies very close to the election period. Why? Because in that way, they could create a strong economic growth and they reduce unemployment. And in the time of the election, they will get more votes. Remember, economic performance shapes how people vote. So politicians will be less inclined to adopt economic policies that slow economic growth. And they are more inclined to boost their economy to get more political support. However, the biggest problem here is that economic policies do not respond to market failures. This is a huge warning. So populist politicians want to spend and spend and spend without any consideration, only to guarantee that they will be reelected, but no, without having any prediction about what is going to happen to the economy. And irresponsible expenditures will create biggest problems. We will cover that in another chapter. The partisan model assumes that there is, of course, governments values more monetary autonomy than fixed exchange rates. However, the partisan model is a little bit different from the electoral model. Why? Because for this partisan model, not all think the same. Some parties use monetary policies to reduce unemployment and in that way to get the floating exchange rate. But for other parties, the use of monetary policy is to limit inflation, which means to maintain the fixed exchange rate. Why? Well, because given that there was change in the electoral laws, well, remember, workers had a voice. So the left-wing parties absorbed the workers, and the left-wing parties were more pro-employment. The right-wing parties, well, the right-wing parties, they always left outside the workers, and they were more close to the businesses. So they are more inclined to protect the inflation. They are more anti-inflation. The problem is that the anti-inflation policies and pro-employment policies are antagonists. They represent the unholy trinity. Why? Well, because to get more employment, you have to give autonomy in monetary policy to your government. So the government has to have a floating exchange rate to get or to be possible to make expansionary policies. However, the problem or the cause of expansionary policies is that they create inflation. If you want to reduce inflation, you have to make contractionary monetary policies. So you have to use fixed exchange rates. You have to reduce the currency in circulation. And the problem with that is that creates unemployment. And this is known the Philip curve. So I decided to show you the Philip curve of United States and China. I downloaded the data and I depicted the data from 1990 to 2020. So as you can see, the y-axis is inflation and the x-axis is the unemployment level. And in both countries, there is a negative relationship between unemployment and inflation, which represent this. Pro-employment and anti-inflation are antagonists. So if you want to get more, if you want to, this is not unemployment, sorry, this is employment. I'm so sorry. If you want to reduce your, no, I'm so sorry, this is unemployment, I'm so sorry. If you want to reduce the unemployment, like this, if you want to reduce your unemployment, you have to create inflation. And is the same in China. If you want to reduce the unemployment, Chinese unemployment, you have to create more inflation. This is basically the an expansionary policy. If you want to create jobs, you have to spend. The problem is when you are spending, people get more money and they spend more. And the prices of the goods rise. And that creates inflation. So this is the idea of the partisan model. The partisan model is based on the trade-off between unemployment and inflation that is in the Philip curve. What is the differences? Well, because left parties traditionally have had strong ties to organized labor. Unemployment is central, is a central concern of labor unions. And remember, that was born in between wars, where the levels of unemployment were so high. So left party creates an incentive for lefty governments to use macroeconomic policy to maintain high levels of employment. And they do not care about inflation. They prefer to reduce their employment, but people have income, even though the prices of the economy rises. On the other hand, parties of the right have traditionally had closer links to business interests. So they are more concerned about protecting the value of their accumulated wealth. And since inflation erodes the real value of financial wealth, well, they have interest in maintaining stable prices. And the only way to maintain stable prices is to control the inflation. And to control the inflation is to restrict the autonomy of the government to use the monetary policy, which means to get the fixed exchange rate. The last model is the sectoral model. This is a little bit more complex, but basically, government policies reflects interest group preferences. So policies are determined by the group that has the greatest influence. According to this model, there are only 4 groups or sectors: the import competing producers, the export-oriented producers, the non-traded goods producers, and the financial services industry. How does it work? Each group has over 2 dimensions of exchange rate policy. The first dimension is if the group prefer fixed or floating exchange rates, and the dimension 2 is if the group prefer overvalue or undervalue exchange rates. So let's begin with the group number 1, import competing producers. Dimension 1, they prefer floating exchange rates. Why? Because they are not selling products in the international market. They import to sell in the domestic market. So they need that the economy is in a boom to sell more imported goods. That's why they support that the government uses expansionary monetary policies to create more employment, to get more income, to get money, to give money to people. If this is the case, households are going to demand more. And they are going to demand more, not only domestically, but imports as well. So that's why they prefer floating exchange rate. However, they prefer an undervalued currency. Remember, for example, right? They want an undervalued currency because it's making easier for import competitive producers to dominate the home market. So when they are undervalued exchange rate, the domestic producers are less competitive. So import producers could uh, 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 sell their products without facing high levels of competition. The second group is the exported-oriented producers. They prefer fixed exchange rate. Why? Because they are heavily engaged in international trade. So they prefer stability, and therefore they attach a little value to monetary policy autonomy. They don't want that the government intervene in the economy to boost the economy. They prefer fixed exchange rate, fixed prices to make contracts, better contracts that could maintain their trade terms over time. However, they prefer, I'm sorry, oh yes, they also prefer undervalued currency. Why? Because with undervalued currency, their prices are cheaper, as we presented in the example, and they could get more competitiveness in the international market because of the undervalued currency. The non-trade good producers, well, they are firms that only produce in the domestic market. So they prefer floating exchange rate. Why? Because they are not integrated into the global economy. So they generate the revenues from sales in the domestic market, and they prefer that the government could have the autonomy to boost the economy, because in that way they could sell more goods in the domestic market. However, they prefer overvalued currency. Why? Because that rise the income of people employing the non-trade sectors, and they could consume more trade goods and domestic goods. And finally, there is the financial service industry. The problem with this group is that it is not clear if they prefer floating or fixed exchange rate. Why? Because, of course, some financial institutions get profits from exchange rate volatility. They invest in currencies. So the floating is better because they could get profits from that. However, the problem is that they want also that the government control inflation. Higher inflation harms the financial sector. So they also want fixed exchange rates. And in the dimension two, it's also not clear if they want undervalue or overvalue currencies. Why? Because financial institutions benefit from a strong currency because it's allowed them to purchase foreign assets at lower prices. However, they also want an overvalued exchange rate. Why? Because in that way, they could um, uh, work with the domestic firms, and the domestic firms needed protection from the um, volatility of the exchange rate. And finally, this is the matrix that is in the chapter that present the basic preferences of stability and strength of the exchange rate of the fourth actors. Remember, I'm not putting here the financial services because it is not clear where the financial sector is. And it is empty, the high sell, because there is no a sector that desires a strong currency and a fixed exchange rate. So, okay, guys, this is the final part of this class. Any question? Remember, and you can send me an email and I will be gladly to answer you. So see you in the next class.